Welcome to the Default Profitable Podcast. You're listening to the next episode. Today we're going to talk about what it takes to start, run, and grow a business, helping people go into business. We'll be talking about some successes, some failures, and some actual lessons from a business owner. I'm your host, Matt Nettleton, and today my guest is Jeff Crane. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Why don't we do this? Yesterday, you and I spoke on the phone for the first time for probably 5 minutes, but why don't you take 2 or 3 minutes, introduce yourself, and then introduce your business to everybody.
I'll try to keep it succinct, I guess. So I ended up with a career in advertising and marketing that I really loved, but I had got downsized 3 different times. And each of those times they had a bonus check with a severance package. And after a while, you look unhireable, I guess. So luckily I had the grace of my boss at the time to look around and get some ideas out there and try to research a little bit. But I wanted to buy a job, I thought. And I thought, well, I can't get fired if I'm the owner. I'll be successful. I know me, and I'm not going to work any harder for them than I would work for myself. So why not make the leap? So I just thought I could buy a business, and finding something was difficult. And I thought we were bankable, so I wasn't too worried about the money. But all these brokers just wanted to sell me something. And I wanted more of a process behind it. I wanted to find a way to understand me as the ideal owner, what role I was going to play. And if that even, because I didn't want to be in a business that didn't fit me, right? So that would just be a recipe for disaster. So I stopped the search with the brokers, and I found a coach actually with the company that I'm with now called the Entrepreneur Source. And Susan is a wonderful, franchise coach, business coach. She's a wonderful mentor. She's helping people figure out business opportunities all along as a career guidance, counselor into the entrepreneurship space. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
So you worked in advertising for 18 years. Yeah. And were you in Indianapolis the whole time?
I was, yes.
All right. And you got downsized 3 times.
Oh, yeah.
And then you said 2 different things. One, you said you wanted to buy a job, and the other thing you said was you wanted to buy a business.
Yeah, they're 2 different things. Yeah, very much so. And that was my learning process, was like, okay, buying a job is not a good idea.
So why don't you define what is buying a job?
Buying a job would be something that you can never resell because there's really no equity to transfer, in my opinion. So something that would be, I think a lot of times accountants, doctors, attorneys, they are the business. And frankly, career coaches like myself could be hard to transfer anything to the next generation, so to speak, or to pass it down. But when you have a real business, there's other people at play. There's repeat customers. There's something actually that you can transfer. And so that's, I guess, what I mean by, buying a job versus a business. Another way to look at it would be, are you working on your business or are you working in it? And those are 2 different things. So that started to guide. I started to learn all that through the process. So I don't want to change my process, at least I wish I had not been fired so many times or downsized, but I got here because of there, and I don't believe in a God of waste. So it all added up, and the learning process just kept going and going.
Okay. And so how long ago did you start your business?
This would have been August of 2015.
Okay. So August of 2015. So typically when people start businesses, they fall into one of 2 groups, right? So one group, they're super passionate about something. They have a great desire and love for it. And they think, I'm going to do this because I really like it. And hopefully the money will follow. And other people will look at the marketplace and they're like, well, I'm not really passionate about this, but there's an opening in the marketplace and I can make money doing this and I need groceries. Yeah. And so they see it as an economic opportunity. When you think about 2015, was this a passion opportunity or a money opportunity?
It was a little bit of both, and I'll tell you why. I had to find something that mattered and made a difference. That was part of my criteria. So there was some passion behind finding it. Ironic that I found a business to help people find a business.
Very meta.
So that was my why, was to give folks a little bit of hope through that process. And the why didn't kind of light up until later in the discovery phase. But I knew I needed to pay the bills. But I didn't know what kind of business I wanted to be in because I was interested in too many things. Literally in advertising, we were working with automotive dealers all the way down to the zoo, like A to Z. and I was interested in all of the revenue models and how things were built. It was very curious, to that end. So overwhelming. And so Susan actually was the first one to really sit me down and help me understand. All right, here are your strengths. Let's get that criteria together, and all of a sudden you start to have a focus, and then things can be a little easier to start researching and more manageable. Take some bite-sized, chunks of knowledge at a time, and do some investigative calls, and meet people. And she opened up many doors, and we finally landed on working together. And I bought a franchise of the Entrepreneur Source in the state of Indiana. That was August of 2015. It took a little while. I think she might have been working with me for 9 or 10 months. I mean, it was a minute.
It was a minute, huh? Okay. So when you think back to 2015, I mean, you had good business experience. You had been relatively successful, although you had been downsized 3 times, which, by the way, isn't that uncommon. And certainly, plenty of people have experienced that.
Oh yeah, it's a common theme, and I love helping those folks. Absolutely.
Yeah. When you think back to 2015, how old were you at that point? You've been in the world for a while, so
I
18
was
years. So you
I
probably had to be
was
about 30, 40.
I was 37, I think, at the time.
All right. So 37, you're not exactly a babe in the woods. You've been out and seen some things. Um, what did you discover that you didn't know when it came to running your business?
Oh wow. To be more aware of my weaknesses and finding a way to compensate for them. You
So,
really need a board of directors. You need it's lonely unless you have people like at your side. A wingman, so to speak.
all right. So tell me about that. So when you say it's lonely if you don't have a wingman or a board of directors, what do you mean by that? Give me
I,
some.
in my mind, you need somebody who's a great banker that understands the finances, that voice in your life that can be really fiduciary. You need uh, maybe an accountant, an attorney. You need some kind of insurance, and there's a lot of flavors of insurance to help you understand risk, and probably an attorney, just to help you understand, what are the rules that are out there in the marketplace, and that kind of thing. And finding somebody in your life that can fill those seats on a little mini board of directors is I think, one of the key things I never really heard until later. But before anybody, let me back up a second, Matt, if you don't mind. Before you leave a job to start a business, make sure you get some independent insurance. Talking about that board of directors makes me remember I really wish I would have gotten some long-term disability or some other things while I was still a little more insurable instead of independent. And so before you make the leap, the underwriters don't seem to care. They just care about the situation you're in at that moment. And so, we're fine. Nothing happened. I didn't get hit by a bus. Nothing off the rails. I already had life insurance, but I probably would have, should have, could have had some better disability insurance. And of course, if you're bringing a partner into it, you definitely need to have that exit strategy figured out. And so that way you're still friends and still see each other at holidays, even if you decide not to work together anymore. So those are good
Yeah.
things nobody really told me.
So there's a couple things there. One, I mean, you brought up an accountant, you brought up banker, you brought up attorney. So you have all these outside areas of specialized knowledge. If Michael Gerber talks about the E-myth and how people have an entrepreneurial seizure and they're like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go do this on my own because I can make more money. But they don't really know what do this on my own means. And you really kind of have to be able to wear a bunch of different hats. Hiring experts for those areas is super important.
Yeah, for sure. And you may meet a couple people that are different facets of that one area. You just in insurance alone, you've got folks that talk about the payroll part of it, the disability, the keep you legal, and that side of things. And there's other folks about the liabilities and risks, with what it means to work together. So there's all multiple people in each one of those roles, perhaps. So you can't know enough people that know what they're doing, at least.
Well,
Get a good
that's
referral.
true. And the other part of that, and it was probably a tough lesson. I learned it watching others, fortunately, is you shouldn't try to cheap out on any of those roles. Like usually hiring the cheapest attorney is a mistake. Hiring the cheapest insurance agent can be a mistake. I mean, so you really want to get the person that is willing to charge you the price for what you need, not just the lowest price possible.
Well said. Well said.
So, yeah.
Well said. Value. Yeah, you got to find the value in somebody who will work with you and understands your situation. Yeah, there's probably a Venn diagram for that, Matt.
Yeah, somewhere out there, there's a graphic. The second thing that I kind of want to talk about, because you're in a very similar world to me, is when you have a business that you are the primary source of revenue from, it's really, to some degree, a job.
Can be. Mm-hmm.
And it makes it very difficult to create something that can be sold or has a book value. Um, but what I want to kind of talk about, and you didn't bring it up, but I want to ask your opinion on, and it's come up in a couple conversations recently. Now, I've been told repeatedly that the rule of thumb is that if the owner is involved in more than 10% of the revenue, you have a job. Meaning, if the owner walks out and 10% of the sales walk out with them, you're probably okay. But once you get to 11%, now you're really having an economic impact on the business.
I'd never heard of that number, but yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, usually those situations you have owners that everything has to go through their desk, which then impacts the value of the business, because if the owner leaves, so does the business. So have you seen
Yeah.
that in your world too?
Not so much dealing with the startups because we're just getting things off the ground typically. Maybe occasionally if there's a resale, of an opportunity that I help a client find. But yeah, I don't think folks have really spent that much time thinking about that particular issue. And so when I bring it up, I think it helps them really get clear about what they're looking for, not just the strengths they need, but also to delegate and find out what they want more of in their next job as well as or role, as well as what they want less of. And so I ask them things like, are you going to spend time and money at this role, or are you going to invest in this time in this role?
Right.
And a job feels like you're spending time with somebody else. Investing feels like you're wanting a return. So what's the return conversation look like?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting. So this is episode 88 of this, all small business owners, all from the Indianapolis area primarily. Um, and one of the things that people have talked about is the inaccuracy of their first business plan. And it's like, I wrote a business plan up, but none of the things that I thought I was going to sell, people wanted to buy, or the business model I thought I was going to run, people didn't want to. But it gets back to the value is not the plan, the value is the process of planning. And to some degree, what you're talking about there is, can you give me a vision of uh, what you want to own, right? Do you want to sell your time and get money for it, but once you sell it, you don't get anything else? Or do you want to invest your time so that you spend it on something, but as you spend it, the value builds over time? And, like an HVAC company, you can sell again if you're
Right.
not doing 100% of the work or doing 100% of the sales.
I guess this is ideally why the world of franchising was so appealing to me. In the advertising world I came from, I was working with several different co-ops of advertising, major brands, typically very consumer B2C type stuff. But there's a whole other world of B2B out there as well. In fact, there's over 98 industries inside of that umbrella of franchising alone. And for many people who are in Indiana who have connections to this podcast, just our little state alone is like $14 billion of economic impact every single year from franchising in general. I mean, it's bigger than construction. It's bigger than higher ed, I think, even. Uh, but there's some pretty massive amounts of impact and jobs created. So I wanted to unpack it and learn more because it's more than just French fries and burritos. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on. I mean, any service that can be duplicated and distributed is a franchise opportunity, and the franchisor has probably got something figured out. So as we investigate to learn, folks, I'm getting my clients to talk to other owners and seeing how their plan may have gotten off the rails. And so when you put together a pro forma of a 24 months, you're going through it, the validation work is so much more impactful because now they can tell you what is wrong, what's high, what's low, the revenue side as well as the expense side, and how to manage the cash flow. those lessons come out in conversations. Most likely they'll never share their books with you, but that's fine. Let them give you the feedback and point you in a more clearer direction. And so by the time you end a good round or six, 7 owners, and they're looking at your numbers, you probably got a pretty accurate onboarding plan. And then, of course, the franchisor is only making money when you are successful. So they're not going to let you get too far out of line. And I think that's the piece of franchising that's a cliche. It's like, I want to be in business for myself, but I want to be by myself. And in franchising, you won't be by yourself at all.
Right.
You will actually be amongst a community of people who want to see you succeed and willing to share.
Yeah, one of the nice things about the franchise model is that there's a lot less that you have to think about saying no to, because they take away a lot of the options. And one of the things that self-employed people are really good at is coming up with a list of 3,000 different things they can do this morning. And with a franchise arrangement, usually it's like, hey, here are the 10 things you actually need to accomplish. Just do these.
That's fair. Yeah, that's very fair. Let's follow the recipe. And then I use a cake analogy. So if you're baking a cake, you got to have the right ingredients, right? The right temperature, the right time. All those things are part of how to bake a cake. But depending on the personality style of the client, we're trying to figure out, all right, how much icing do you add? What color icing? How many candles? Like, you get to make some choices. You're not totally as rigid as everybody might think. There are more liberal versions of franchising, and there are more conservative. So, depending on the person's style and the role they want to play, they've got to either delegate or find the right system and process to plug in.
And it's funny because we use the McDonald's example all the time. It would be impossible to argue that McDonald's is not a successful franchise. I would also argue that it's impossible to say that McDonald's makes the highest quality and best tasting hamburger. But they are consistent and they are profitable, right? So it's not for everybody, but there is a market for it. And then there's a market for Five Guys, and there's a market for Wendy's. And it's not saying, hey, listen, if you're going to do hamburgers, you have to do it exactly this way. But if you're going to be part of a franchise group, you're going to do it their way.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that, and that's part of what you're investing in.
Right. So let me ask you a question. When you get somebody who is a cog in a big corporate machine that comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about starting my own gig. What's the story that you tell them to discourage them from doing that?
Oh, well, I don't know if I'd discourage them from doing anything, but I don't want them to jump into anything too fast.
Right.
I want them to research, and I ask them, what their process is. Like, well, what's your process for how you're going to go into that? You've got this dream. Would it be possible to define it more so that a year from today, you're looking back and having accomplished these specific goals? And can that idea get you there? Could there be other ideas if you were to learn and challenge your assumptions and keep an open mind? Could there be other vehicles to get you there? And I think vehicles is a really key word. A business, in many cases, is a vehicle to get you to the next location. And a wise boss once told me a long time ago, I'll never forget, he said, this job should lead you to your next job. So what are you learning in this role or job or business to get you to your next business? And so it's like, how does that come together? So like with yourself in your business, you probably meet a lot of different people that could take angles and opportunities can flow. And so I look at it the same way and find other franchises that might need my help, or I could acquire, or I could start up someday. So, I'm my own client at some point, but trying to follow my own advice. But sorry to get off on a tangent there. That's where I try to slow them down a little bit and get them to understand that they could do 100 different things.
Right.
People take themselves for granted. It's not about the what and the how. It's more about the why. And getting that figured out is probably how it speeds up. But you got to slow down to speed up in that case.
Well, it comes back to the value of planning and having a mission and having a vision of success and sitting back and thinking that, why are you leaving the corporate world? And what do you want to get when you're working for yourself? Because there's a bunch of different ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of ways. And that's part of the freedom, I guess, is why it's appealing. Who wouldn't want to have that freedom as long as you're sustainable? But math looks way different on the revenue side or just the compensation side. So a lot of folks don't really understand that piece. And they think all these business owners have all these great toys or these great, don't make your chapter 1 or 2 when you're comparing to chapter 12 or 18 over here on this other guy or lady or woman,
Yeah.
these business owners are all at different places in their field, and certainly a wise investment strategist once told me you don't want to own anything. You want corporations and trusts and other stuff, and there's a whole nother world to that. Figuring out how do you structure it. So again, calls for more good research before anybody decides where to go. Let's just some more topics in front of them so they don't make any assumptions or they don't miss anything.
Yeah. So and I'll give you a specific example, because when I started my company, my accountant had a specific structure, and my attorney agreed with the structure. And I had a person approach me about being a partner, and they came with a specific investment structure that they wanted to make. And my accountant said, I don't think you can do it that way. And my attorney said, you can absolutely not do it that way. And then my potential investors like, well, I want to do it that way. And I'm like, I got my experts say no, sorry. Love to have you as a part of the group, but here's how we can do it. This is the avenue to do that. So to some degree, you not only have to hire them, you have to believe them.
Oh yeah, good point. Great story. Yeah, you got to follow the advice.
Yeah, because it's easy to say, but I want the investor, I want the partner, I want the, and then I'm going to break the rules, and you just can't do that. So
Great point.
So what I'd like to wrap up with, we got a quick 20 minutes there. What I'd like to wrap up with is if you were to, if 2024 Jeff were to be able to sit down with a beer next to 2015 Jeff the night before you open your business,
Sure.
and say, hey Jeff, listen, everything works out fine, but here's what I need you to focus on first. What would the focus on first thing be?
Oh wow. What would I tell my former self? Rainy day funds are really nice to have. Um, uh, there's never been a better time to grow your faith than when you go to the lockbox looking for a page or a payment and to check that account. I mean, there's a lot of prayer involved. But I think I knew that back then. I had seen that in other friends and businesses and gone to those post office meetings. Ride with them to pick up checks, and thank God they were there. I've seen that in real life beforehand. But I think being disciplined on accounting and tax strategy would probably be the area that I hated the most. So I didn't pay attention to it. And then down the road had to clean up and change software platforms and that kind of stuff. So I'd say, being more mindful of that, being more disciplined in that piece of the puzzle, because my personality style, my problem is staying disciplined in those particular areas. So I thought it wasn't that big a deal. It's a pretty simple business to run. It can't be, money in, money out. There's not a lot of drama, but I should have probably sat down and been more disciplined on a monthly, weekly basis to make sure I was doing the same habits, creating those habits early.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that has been the number one thing that people have talked about, is the value of financial literacy and how business math is different than home math. So the numbers that you run through your checkbook at home don't exactly line up with the way the math works in your business. And that goes back to having the attorney, the accountant, the advisors that are outside that actually do the business math and tell you what you need to know and explain, hopefully over time, how to learn.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, there's a whole. They don't necessarily have that in an easy guide. And there's no how-to guide that's that easy. There's a lot of wrinkles to that.
Yeah, and it's all about your business model and how you're arranged. So, all right. So to wrap up, any specific advice you would give an aspiring or new business owner as they kick off their journey?
Let's see here. I would make sure you be disciplined about the accounting, like I mentioned earlier, the bookkeeping, those different disciplines, but also make sure you schedule time for some rest, some exercise, some personal time. I wouldn't give up on that. It's easy just to go pour yourself in your work, but at what cost to the family or a lifestyle is that? So be mindful of that. Income is first, lifestyle would be second, then building that wealth along the way, being strategic, like you mentioned earlier, is awesome. That way you can actually have an equity conversation to sell or to pass along down the road. So, and it has to be in that order: income, lifestyle, wealth, and then equity. That's a really important piece of the puzzle, and not get ahead of yourself or get them flipped.
Right.
Don't get the lifestyle ahead of, and the freedom and the lifestyle and the money starts to flow. Don't you dare get it out. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, you got to do them in order. It's
Sure.
like baking that cake. It doesn't do any good to put flour in the oven and add eggs later.
That's right. Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, I think those are some pretty good lessons. Before we wrap up, I'm going to make sure everybody knows that if they want to find out more about Jeff or his business and helping people find franchises that fit for them, you can go to our show notes over at defaultprofitable.com. As a listener, there's 3 ways you can help us. Leave a review wherever you listen, subscribe wherever you listen, or if you hear something interesting, share the episode with somebody you think would actually benefit. Jeff, thanks again for being a guest.
My pleasure. It was so fun, and I appreciate the invite. And for anybody who's contemplating on the fence, it's a free conversation to have. It just takes a little time and energy, and I'd be happy to have that chat. So there's a lot of things out there that are proven that you don't have to have the burden of creating everything from scratch. There's some great things that we could look at together.
Yeah. All right. And for our listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode of Default Profitable. Until then, stay focused, keep working, stay profitable.